Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Brady Grove bringing you another interlude episode of RotoBallers official MMA podcast. Tap that, and we are looking forward to more USFL action this weekend. There's no UFC action this weekend. It's an off week, and with me today, if there is a take or news, an injury update in the USFL or XFL, this dude's the one putting it out there. He is host of the Markcast. Give it up for Reid Johnson. Reid, how you doing, man?
I'm good. I appreciate it, except for wasting your time and getting the time zone wrong on here. I appreciate working around. We got to figure. I'm so used to scheduling other people, and then when it comes to myself, I got it wrong. But other than that, I think we're good.
Well, dude, East Coast and Pacific, that's a hard one to get right. And East Coast and Mountain West, forget about it. Like, I am not going to be able to get that straight no matter what.
We got it here. No, it's good. It's USFL only this weekend. The USFL hater here that I've been called online. We have to stomach through, I guess, another week of USFL. I'm kidding. Very excited for the games. I think it should be fun.
Well, that's the thing. So the last week I had on Colby Dant of the USFL and XFL gambling podcast, and we were talking about how the spring football. Being a fan of one, it makes sense to be a fan of both, and it doesn't make sense to root against another league because spring football success for one is spring football success for all. It seems like, and let's start with the XFL, man. Dude, we were both Sea Dragons people this year. You live in Seattle. Seattle was a team that has a uniquely XFL flavor. And that's what I like about the XFL and the USFL. For down to the uniforms, to the talent, I think that they have uniquely spring flavors. What was your favorite part about following the Sea Dragons this year as a Seattle sports fan?
Well, it was weird, right? So we had Jim Zorn back in 2020, and Zorn, although a Seattle legend and obviously a coach, over in Washington as well, it was a little bit of a wet blanket. I don't think ever really got into the XFL. I think Vince kind of gave him the talking points. We met him a couple times. I think he kind of had, okay, this is kind of what this is. Hazlitt kind of felt like a rollback of that, right? Like Hazlitt's kind of here. He doesn't do a lot of social media. He's kind of boring. But then you had Danucci, that was, the cockiest, most, crap talker player that you could have. And I thought it was a good balance. It was kind of like, Bonnie and Clyde or whatever. You had Danucci kind of throwing the interceptions and then Hazlitt threatening to kill him on the sideline. So I thought it was kind of a good buddy cop drama we had going on. So I did enjoy that.
And with the Sea Dragons, it's not only Jim Haslett, but June Jones, a June Jones offense. It was almost designed for a quarterback like Ben DiNucci, a high risk, high volume, still high mistake kind of offense. And they started to get it together at the end of the season. But, there was also the Josh Gordon thing, man. Like, how often does a player like that, who's had that kind of NFL history, actually translate to spring football and have the kind of season that he does? The closest thing we've kind of seen is AJ McCarron.
Yeah, well, it was weird because we had seen Josh Gordon back in fan controlled 1.0. I think he was part of that, and so he had got a couple routes with that. He was with the Zappers, I believe. That was that Bob Menery's team or whatever. He brought him in, and they were the ones that had God, who the heck was it? That with Johnny Manziel and kind of all that stuff. So we saw a little bit of Josh. I'm surprised, but see if you notice now. I haven't seen Gordon getting any tryouts of any kind right following the season, where we've seen DiNucci already get signed to the Broncos. I think we've had somewhere south of 20 players from the NFL get signed, and Gordon still is not in that. So it's good to see him, but I don't know if, for whatever reason, age or otherwise, if that was enough to kind of reset his career.
It's kind of the guys like Josh Gordon and AJ McCarron that don't get the workouts and the tryouts and the signings. It's like, but when you discover, Jacques Patrick for what he offers, and the tight ends that are kind of at the tight, although, I don't know what Sal Canelo's been up to. That guy's just kind of a spring football tight end.
He got a tryout. I think he got a tryout. I was just seeing today. We were discussing we have our XFL group. He might just be kind of a camp buddy at this point, where he's been signed. He was with the Packers last year, but I do think he got a tryout. I can't remember if it was with the Bears or otherwise, but I know Canella was there. There was a couple more tryouts today that we saw that we were retweeting.
And good for Alizé Mack, too, because, the Brahmas, too, the amount of offensive pieces that they had moved to the NFL for the kind of offensive season they had, it's it's good to see. I think that while continuity is good for a league, I think that as they're expanding and they're going to do an XFL rookie draft and they're doing all of these rookie showcases and the HBCU showcase, I think that these kind of leagues can kind of make their name off that undrafted free agent talent.
Well, it's a balance. And you were talking before about the XFL, USFL. It's very much like WCW and WWE or, WWF, or you have WWE and AEW now. But when it comes to XFL or USFL, I think USFL wants to exist a little bit more as program filler, where I think the XFL wants to kind of carve out a unique space. They need to figure out the NXT model, which is how can we be a developmental show where ultimately the goal is to move people on, but we still need to put a compelling product on the air to get 1 million, 2 million people to watch every week. And NXT's, worked through that for years. And I think XFL is getting to that. I don't think we need to talk 87 times a game about players wanting to transition to the NFL. I think we can balance that out, but they'll figure it out. I don't think they hit the sweet spot this year, but I think they will eventually.
And that's another thing, is that we're in an era in 2023 where you can watch more football at the college level than ever before. And there's more prospects than ever before. The talent level is higher. And so you can kind of support these leagues. And so the XFL, the quality seemed to go up tremendously from a product on TV standpoint, and the level of play, what the worst teams were doing, what the best teams were doing after the latter half of the season. These things take time, and the USFL has that advantage over the XFL.
Well, advantage in terms of what? In terms of players having more continuity now?
Just the league having another season under its belt. And the foundation, a name recognizability that, it taps into a nostalgia of people who were football fans in the 80s. Like people like my dad remember the New Jersey Generals as a big thing when Herschel Walker signed with them and all that. So it's that kind of advantage. I think the XFL is seen as the less likely of the two to stay around long term. But I think that has less to do necessarily with the product and more of the brand and maybe The Rock. Like what are the interests in the XFL? It seems like they're just different. I think the USFL, like you said, wants to establish themselves as like AAA. But like what the XFL wants to do is more like the NBA G League and the G League Ignite.
Well, it's weird, you talk about the nostalgia because it's XFL was basically kind of a joke franchise until 2020 when Vince brought it back. And I mean, there's the whole history of that with them doing the 30 for 30 with ESPN and basically mocking the XFL, which was really what incentivized Vince to bring it back. One of the many reasons of, Vince has had very few failures in his life, but yeah, it was really a joke. And so to think that, Danny and The Rock and anyone would spend money for this franchise, 2 years before would have been absolutely a laughing stock versus obviously in 2020 after Vince kind of revitalized it.
And so, who are your kind of favorite players and favorite stories to follow during the XFL season? And ultimately, after this season, where the numbers weirdly went up in the latter half of the season when it looked like they were going to tank and they made a bit of a recovery, what do you think that the XFL did right this season?
Well, I mean, obviously the biggest thing is to complete the season. Danny had quotes, I think, in USA Today, like the monkey's off our back. We're able to do all this stuff. In terms of storylines, I think not every player is there for their own kind of. They all have their own path they're on. It's kind of like if you're watching Survivor, and every single person's there to kind of prove something different. Where you obviously have Ben DiNucci, felt like he was overshadowed with the Cowboys, thought he deserved a spot there. Hey, I'm going to come back in. I'm going to prove everybody wrong. I'm going to work my butt off and do that. And then you have someone like AJ McCarron. He widely publicized, yeah, I want to play for my kids. I'm willing to take a pay cut. I just want to be here and play. And then you have someone like Brandon Silvers, who I just saw on Instagram has already spent all of his playoff winnings money, or not the playoff winnings, but the game winnings money in Vegas. It was basically just there to kind of play football and have a good time. So you have all these various things. So it's interesting. Not everybody, as much as the XFL wanted to pitch it as every single person here wants to move to the next step, it's not that way. And I think the storytellers there with ESPN and Player 54 and everyone, Peter Berg, kind of everyone involved, I think they can do a better job moving forward of, okay, let's find out a couple different types of stories versus every single person here wants to be somewhere else.
And, as as not happy with the results of the North Division playoffs as you might be, I think the DC Defenders seem to win people over just with the quality of their play, and Jordan Ta'amu has that ability. But people were talking about Derek King, people were talking about Abram Smith, and that they had a great home crowd too. And that was, they mixed that quality of play, when the Battlehawks missed out on the playoffs due to the way that the postseason was set up. But, the Defenders seem to get a lot of attention just because they were a really good team and a good home environment, and that's great to see.
Well, you had some of the teams like, Orlando. We've had Terrell Buckley on the show a couple times. And basically, like, I did not know how to construct a roster, right? Like, I did not know what to do. And I tried to help, get my director of player personnel and do all that. Where, you had Von Hutchins with Reggie Barlow there in DC. And, they kind of knew what to do. And, DC, you had the carryover from 2020 that there's no surprise that the hottest markets in 2023 were the hottest markets in 2020 with DC and St. Louis. Seattle fell off from 2020. I attribute the Kraken to a lot of that and the lack of local marketing here. But, it's interesting the markets that the XFL did on their own in 2020 and how those results were versus the ones that they carried over from 2020. Because it's vastly different kind of the success rate they had with we borrowed some of these over versus we're trying some new things.
And, I had a lot of fun following the Orlando Guardians over the latter. I mean, really the whole year when it started off with the whole fake selling the playbook thing. And whatever that whole thing was, so bizarre, and yet ends up with Quentin Dormady just slinging all over the field. And, so they were fun. I thought that really, like, the teams like the Renegades and the Brahmas, they became fun to watch because it was like, I can't believe they're still in the postseason race. And yet these teams, they kept looking better. And Jack Cohn had a couple of really good games down the stretch where it's like, I'm questioning everything I think about Jack Cohn as the quarterback of the Brahmas. And then the Dragons, very typical, like, very fun offensive team to watch. Even though that wasn't always the result, especially over the first half of the season, it was like their identity. Like, it was what you imagined them as when you tuned in, even though it ended up being Tuzar Skipper's show for the first half of the season, but they were kind of marketed as a light up offense. And so it was an all around effort near the end of the season, it seemed like, around the league.
Well, Seattle, it seemed a little bit more like, hey, we want to have this all-star team of we have DiNucci and we're bringing in Gordon and we're bringing in Philip Lindsay. Like, what can we do? And Randy Mueller there, the director of player personnel over there, like, they never kind of gave up during the season. I mean, we saw a little bit of that with San Antonio bringing in Ben Kurt, and obviously he got injured. What I liked was, even with the Brahmas, they demoted Jaime Elizondo and moving around that. And we saw the Guardians do that. Vipers, switch their defensive coordinators and things. I like that the coaches didn't give up during the year. We saw a little bit more of that in the USFL where, well, I'm 2-4, I'm 2-5. I'm probably going to be out for the year. Like, we're going to kind of, go out fishing here, where I felt like the XFL teams wanted to remain competitive until the end of the season. And you saw that obviously with Arlington 4-6, making trades midseason and ended up winning everything with Luis Perez.
And, that might not be the tune this year in the USFL with the parity across each division. But so in the XFL, it seems like in these leagues, there's always a few markets that they're trying to tap into where it's like, it's just a logistical thing. And it's like, I don't know how much traction you're going to get in that spot. So where do you think are the most logical expansion locations for the XFL?
I mean, the big one is obviously San Diego versus Vegas. You want to have that West Coast presence. I think if you see, obviously, with St. Louis and how they adopted the XFL in 2020 and then 2023, having, the NFL team kind of ripped out. Lack of that, I think, galvanizes a lot of people. San Diego's getting the MLS team. They're going to be having the infrastructure there for that. Vegas was kind of in the runnings for that. I just don't know where you put the Vipers there long term, and I don't think that city embraced. I think at this point, if the XFL maybe 4 years ago had been in Vegas, I just think too much has moved in, and there's too many too many things competing for eyeballs there. I remember when I interviewed one of the gentlemen with the Vegas Sports Business Journal, and he said, basically, unless we can get an interview with The Rock, we have no interest in covering the Vipers here at all. Like, that's the only time we're going to write about it. And that's just not sustainable going forward to have a market look at you that way.
Well, and I mean, they kind of fumbled the whole Brett Hundley being the most the highest paid quarterback in the XFL, and by the end of it, not even being their quarterback. But it ended up being better for their results. When you have a quarterback who's actually utilizing his legs and not making a lot of mistakes, you saw it with the Vipers, and you saw it with even the Brahmas when Cone was out, and I forget who it was who was kind of at least using his legs in the game. But what about Portland? Because that's one that the USFL is always kind of threatening to move into. They just bought the rights to the Portland Breakers in case they ever want to move that. What do you think about that? Because Portland always makes sense because it's such an untapped professional sports market.
Portland's weird. I mean, all you have is where the Timbers play there. I don't know the capacity or logistics of that stadium to put someone there. I mean, I know that Josh Corbin, was that his name, Josh Corbin? The trademark attorney guy, he reported all of that. I mean, the league came out and said they're basically cleaning up old trademarks that they own. We've tracked all this for years with the real USFL suing the new USFL and Fox and all of that. I think a lot of it is merchandising down the lines and them to be able to kind of utilize the old footage and sell that. I don't know if I see New Orleans moving, and I think that's a strong market for them. And also just where USFL is based right now, so in the Southeast with the hubs and everything, that's a major, I think that's like a year 5, 6 step, not a year 3, 4. I think we got to get to the 8 markets we are in the South and East before we decide to go, west up to Portland. But Portland's a good market. I mean, the Trailblazers do good there. I mean, I don't know. I live in Seattle. Portland's weird. That's their trademark there. Keep Portland weird, and it is kind of weird.
And yeah, at least the XFL, for the purpose of Portland, has the Seattle versus Portland thing. That's a possibility. But I think that the XFL is going to keep its flavor that it had this year, because I think that I was really encouraged by the quality and the television product by the end of the season, with obviously some Dean Blandino / in-game interview criticisms. But they're going to figure out what works. It seems like they did a pretty good job of adapting in that. And with all their rookie showcases and their eye towards young talent, I'm really excited to see what comes of them next year.
I feel very differently, and we kind of did our big XFL retrospect last week, or it was like a 3.5 hour episode, kind of looking at all the different stuff, and I feel very differently. And leading into the XFL 2023, everyone's freaking out and, hey, how's it going to compare and all this stuff. And I always thought I was the voice of reason of kind of, hey, let's leave all this alone and kind of let them do their own thing. But I think I fell kind of victim to that as well of, we're looking at timelines and what did they do in 2020 versus what did they do. I think if you look at it in a vacuum of just, here's a group of people, 800 employees that have never ran a football league before, I really think you have to give it maybe an A-, but I really think it was a resounding success. If you remove XFL 2020, and I know that's impossible to do, I think they did a lot of good things. I think they tried new things. I think that, they kind of pivoted when they needed to. I feel a lot more positive than I did kind of leading into this season if you take those expectations you had out of it.
And so that kind of brings us to the USFL. We are entering week 7 this week, which is insane. It has gone so quick. And it seems like I went to the doubleheader in Canton just yesterday. And, this is a league that it has insane parity, way more than we would have thought, especially after after Birmingham beat Memphis 42-2. it seemed like a given that they were going to run away with it, but it now looks like they're a little bit too banged up to be that dominant. But I love the Mississippi Delta rivalries of the USFL. That is something they have gotten right at this point.
USFL is hard for me. I like the USFL. I obviously want all these leagues to succeed. I think the USFL last year fit a really nice niche of it had been long enough since XFL 2020. There wasn't really anything on the calendar. I don't know if it's better or worse that the XFL and the USFL basically overlapped by what ended up being about 5 weeks with the championship games and the bye weeks and the playoffs and kind of all that stuff. I don't know. I don't see, and I haven't last year and I haven't this year seen USFL exist outside of Fox properties where obviously Fox owns the league. They want to control the message where I see a lot of non ESPN people talking about the XFL, and that very well would just be my Twitter and the way I see things. I don't see, except for a banner on Undisputed or Colin Cowherd kind of doing a reader, I just don't see a lot of non Fox people talking about it.
And that's kind of one of the things that they've gotten wrong. And I made this point the other week talking to Colby Dant is, ESPN Plus is a great unifier. You know where to go and look for the XFL on the days that it's going to be on. And we have seen the USFL struggle with the games that end up on Fox Sports 1 and on USA that are not on the huge primetime networks. And I have to say that they've made some really questionable decisions as to which of those games is going to go on those lesser viewed networks.
But see, that's the thing, and it's so funny. And obviously, like Mike Mitchell posts the ratings every week, and then people freak out and talk about it. Like, I firmly believe the ratings, at least for the USFL, and if you've tracked it with the XL, but it's all about network and time. People watch it. It could be the Michigan Panthers 13-10 against whatever. Like, I think if it's on NBC, it's going to do better. If it's on Fox, it's going to do a little worse. I really think you could put any game in any place. I know that people have talked about flexing games and moving things around. I really think the network and the level of clearance is different between the NBC and Fox and everything else. I just think you're going to get more viewers. You might obviously like the Kentucky Derby lead-in is going to bump that up. No other USFL game has hit over 1 million this year, and I think that the games that do good are the daytime NBC games. People are watching it. It seems like they have their TVs on, and I don't know if switching the games around would benefit that any more than it would already.
Well, and that's kind of the thing about having a league with such parity is you really don't have a good idea of what the teams are that you want to push to the forefront.
No, and I mean, it's so unpredictable. The thing that, and I had it in my head earlier, I was trying to remember, the thing that's the biggest challenge for the XFL and the USFL, same with the CFL. When you only have 8 or 9 teams, you only got 4 games a week. They're not all going to be good. The NFL, there's 5-6 games every week that are total duds and no one wants to watch it. But you bury those games. Okay, we got the Sunday night, we got whatever. XFL, you got 4 games a week, or USFL, like 1 or 2 of them probably aren't going to be any good. You're not going to have 4 good games every weekend. It's just not the way it works. And so you just hope the times that you have them in the time slots carry it. But I don't think you can flex that much, especially where, like you said, the teams, it's so unpredictable. Okay, maybe New Orleans comes back this week. Maybe they get their ass beat again. Like, we just don't know. It's too hard to predict to kind of worry about that.
Well, do you have any idea or any like numbers that you've seen about the amount of money that's being bet on one league as opposed to another?
So we had on a lot. I found an untapped market of sports, DFS guys, because that is way outside my purview. But a lot of fantasy guys and DFS guys and all of that last year and into this year, because as you would imagine, the circle of USFL and XFL people is not great in terms of like, hey, I don't have 1,800 people I can talk to about these leagues. Where I do like the CFL for that wave, where the CFL has 100 years of established media around this. I would get these guys and they would say, honestly, like, I can kind of sway the odds every week depending on how I bet or we talk, just because there is so little action on it, and the odds would be so uninformed of what the games were that you could really beat the system by if you even had a modicum of knowledge about any of these games. So I don't think there's a vast. I mean, I know the XFL talks about the over and under every week, and like we had, I think it was Ian Fitzsimmons or whatever had his ticket, and Cashman Field. We're talking about that. I don't think there's a lot of people betting on it. I don't think there's enough money coming together for these pools to be worth a lot. I think that they could tap more into that with having more transparency with the injury reports and their depth charts and all of that. But USFL has done a horrendous job. I mean, we've just started getting depth charts week 5, which is kind of unacceptable.
Which is like the crazy thing is the value in betting in the USFL this year has been there because they get it so wrong on the last second scratches that we've seen. I mean, I thought that Houston was a very live money line dog against New Jersey last week. Am I? That's right, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I got it here. Yeah.
And then you find out that Kenji Bahar's playing, which really, even with Terry Wilson in, I thought like running quarterback with Mark Thompson versus whatever the Generals had to offer, I still liked it. But then you find out that DeAndre Johnson's still getting benched, Lalletta's playing, and it's like, man, you got an absolute bargain on the Gamblers plus 1.5 points.
Yeah, I don't know. I've complained about it all year. I know we had depth charts week 1, and then we were told those weren't supposed to go out. I know the XFL had trouble with the the accuracy of their depth charts. I think you would rather have some information out there, but neither of these leagues has done a tremendously good job. I just don't understand it because it's a free way to get more people interested in your product. And where they, like I said before, where they talk about betting every week on the games, that like in their head, they're like, we need to embrace sports betting. We just don't know how to do it. And I don't know why they don't bring on, like, we have Eric Eager on this week, and he used to be with PFF, and he's with Sumer Sports now. Like, someone that's involved in this, one of the Run the Sims guys or whatever, like, bring in a consultant. Like, what do I try to interview these guys, but bring someone in, like, what do you need? What can we do to make, what is your audience, and what can we do to make this better? I know last year we had Mark Drumheller on, runs the fantasy betting for Yahoo Sports, and said, I have not had a single person from the USFL reach out to me at all this entire year. I've written about it every week. I write for Yahoo Sports. That seems odd to me that you have people actively creating content involved in this, and you don't know how to harness that and utilize it in any way.
That is the craziest thing. And that, if anything that I've seen in the last few years and in this year of spring football that concerns me about the future of spring football, is that is something that is so easy to do if you're a professional sports league. And it's, when you see websites that don't look good, or as you found out, you order a jersey that ends up sucking, and you're not publishing injury reports, and there's last second scratches and bettors are pissed. It's like, man, that could have been one intern's work for a week easily. Why are you not doing that?
Well, and I don't want, I know, and I don't know exactly how the Fox Sports has their thing, theirs, whatever, put together. I know it's a lot of second hours of people that already are working for Fox, right? That's how Fox keeps the USFL, right? We made money last year. Well, the reason why the USFL made money in season 1 was because it's basically a write-off for Fox, and everyone that already works for Fox is doing like social media for the USFL on the side, and we're doing this on the side, and we're doing that. We're not flying out Joe Klatt and Kurt to the games. We're having them do it from the booth at home. Like, they can save money that way. XFL brought in people tremendously late to be able to do a lot of the communications and social media this year. I think that with a year under their belt going into next year, I anticipate that to go much, much better for the XFL. USFL has had an entire year and also has had tens and tens of us telling them what to do that would make it better, and they've still chosen not to do it. So I have less faith in the USFL suddenly deciding to embrace that than I do the XFL, and that, not trying to be a homer, but that I just, that the way I see it.
Well, and okay, I had something I wanted to get to later, and then you said something. Oh damn. That was the point. That you said kind of about the CFL, how there's a long-standing media, establishment that's connected with it. But this is kind of one of the weird things about the XFL and even about the USFL with a little bit more establishment that and a little bit more disassociation, I would say, maybe from the fan base, is there's a very limited set of us out here that even talk about this. And we interact with each other on the internet pretty often. And it's a niche group that does a lot of this. But at the same time, I also feel like when it comes to the XFL and the USFL, what we say sometimes matters like 0.01%.
I think the XFL does a better job listening. I think that I've had conversations with people where they are very in tune with what's going on. I've also had conversations with people with the USFL where I know that they very much do not care. Same thing, like I said, with the depth charts and having conversations like, we had that week 1. That was great. Okay, no, we're not doing that again. Okay, but why? Well, we're just not going to do that. Okay. So, I think that Fox very much feels like we can do this on our own. I've had certain teams and certain people work with me better with the USFL. We've had interviews provided for us. The XFL has been tremendous with me, and I can really have no complaints about the access that they've given me, allowing me to cover the kickoff all the way up through the championship game. And I think that and if I could, have a truth serum and talk to some of the people at the XFL, I think that them going in, I would love to know their expectations of what they thought media coverage of the XFL would be versus what it actually was. And I think the later the season went, they realized, oh, we do need to rely a little bit more on some of these content creators, because it's hard for an alt football league to stay in the news cycle all the time unless Quentin Dormady, allegedly steals plays or something really bad happens, right? You don't get a lot of alt football coverage, save for kickoff, maybe the ratings crash in week 5, and then the championship game. It's hard to generate that content the rest of the year.
And so, all right, I know you're critical of the USFL, but what are some things that you think they're doing right now?
Every single person,
or that you like watching, either one of those.
I like a lot of the players, right? I mean, we've tracked a lot of these guys from the Spring League and all the way through the USFL last year, the XFL, kind of all that stuff. Everyone I've talked to, and your mileage may vary. I think the product is very clean for the USFL. I don't know if it's too clean, but it is exactly what you would expect from watching Fox, NFL on a Sunday versus Fox USFL here in, at the end of May. I think what the games are going to look and sound like. I wish the commentators were a little bit more invested. I don't know if the XFL commentators always knew what to talk about, but at least I felt like they were trying to let's talk about betting now. Let's do this. Let's do that. The USFL feels a little sleepy at that point, but the gameplay has been good. The continuity. I think the teams are starting to get identities. I think the XFL hit that by the end of the first season too. It's really hard the first couple weeks. Who are these teams? What are they trying to do? I think that the gameplay has been good. There hasn't really been we haven't had any gaffes, for better or worse, like we did last year with Pizzagate and kind of all that stuff. I don't know. It's been really safe. It's been really safe. It's been really sterile. I think it's what Fox wants. We have 12 hours of content we can put on every weekend that we own, and we can put on our website, and without tremendous extra effort to do a lot of other things.
And the USFL, it kind of establishes a little bit more of an NFL-esque feel obviously with the Fox and the NBC broadcast, but there's a lot of high-level running backs in the USFL. There's at least there's teams that have risen to the top just because of their defense. But I know you've had McLeod Bethel Thompson on your show a handful of times. It seems like I feel like I see his name mentioned in your feed pretty often, but he's been a great story, and he's been playing well. They just feel like a high quality football league, but that it has a bit of a ceiling, maybe it feels like. And so here's another thing: you have so many players and personalities from each of the leagues on your show. What do you sense the happiness level is of the players in each of the two leagues, because ultimately that is extremely important for long-term success of both of these spring football leagues.
I think that's a really touchy subject. I think the USFL players last year felt the need almost immediately to unionize, pass the CBA in the offseason, work on things going into this year. We're still getting details out from the XFL. They, voted to unionize or not here a couple weeks ago, and they declined that. I don't know if they're trying to unionize with the NFLPA, if they don't want to unionize with the steelworkers. It is interesting that one league, and you have union representatives, right, in Kenneth Farrow that has played in the XFL and obviously helped the USFL guys unionize, that they did not feel the need to unionize in the XFL. You could say things or not about how players feel in that league. I know that it's better this year with 4 teams in 2 different hubs in the USFL versus all 8 teams trying to share a lot of those resources. Everyone I've talked to in the XFL feels the hub has worked tremendously for them, and the abundance of things that they're able to have in the hubs there and the way that the practices are. But I've also heard that travel is really hard for the XFL, where you have a lot of late nights getting in the morning. So if you want to give a side against the XFL, I do think the travel schedule is very rough for the XFL.
Well, and it's good to hear, at least that you think that a good portion of these players are looking at this as like an opportunity that could, propel them to a different life. Because that's important too. You don't want this to be where everybody feels like it's their stopping point. And I feel at least, the XFL in the aftermath of the season, with all the players that are getting opportunities and guys, not just big name guys from college that were kind of in the headline, for what we do for XFL headlines. There was a lot of people that took advantage of that opportunity and moved on. I think that's good for the product.
Yeah, like I said, it needs to be a mix. I mean, you need to have your Tommaso Ciampas and Johnny Gargano's kind of wrestling clinics in the NXT like you had kind of in the glory days there, and then have people be elevated up. You need to have mainstays. If it's a Brandon Silvers and he wants to stay healthy and come back for a couple years, you have your continuity there. You need to have. You can't have a reset every year. The USFL has had continuity going through it. I think that helps. You can't have full roster resets every year. It's just going to be unsustainable to the fans of the teams.
And this has got to be the best time. I mean, it's quite easily the best time in world history to be a professional football fan and to be a sports fan, with all the opportunities that we get to watch everything, as weird as it gets and as niche as it gets, for what we want to see. And there's the National Arena League. There's the European League of Football. There's fan-controlled football. The opportunities out there are abundant. And yet it seems like what almost gets forgotten is the Canadian Football League, which has been around for such a long time, that people forget that alternative leagues to the NFL aren't necessarily brand new. And the Canadian League, so Grey Cup odds as of May 10th, the Blue Bombers are the favorites at plus 225 to take the Grey Cup. The Argonauts at plus 500. Ticats plus 550. The Lions plus 550. Calgary Stampeders plus 650. The Rough Riders plus 1,200. Alouettes plus 1,200. Red Blacks plus 1,500. The Edmonton Elks plus 2,000. What do you like about the Canadian Football League, and who are the teams and the players that you're looking to this season? Because as the more I got in to the XFL and the USFL this season, it's like I forgot to fully educate myself on the Canadian Football League season starting in the summer.
Yeah, so I would say, and it's curious those odds, because I know the history of obviously the league last year and kind of the teams. I think Hamilton's pretty high up there. Hamilton's brought in a new legacy quarterback in Bo Levi Mitchell, the transfer from Calgary. I think that might be too high. The Lions are riding off of the Nathan Rourke stuff last year. I probably put Calgary at 3rd there. Argonauts, they won the Grey Cup last year. It makes sense putting them at 2. That was kind of the upset over Winnipeg. What I like about the CFL, and if you want to get into the CFL right now, is honestly a really good time. Their preseason is starting. They're going to be streaming half the games, the preseason on CFL. They have a CFL Plus. It's like a free streaming site. You go to CFL.ca. I know people have tried to get into ELF, the European League of Football over in Europe. It's really hard with the VPNs and the paywalls and stuff to kind of do all that. So I would, if you want to get into the CFL, if you love that history and nostalgia of the USFL and the team identities, the CFL, this will be their 110th Grey Cup. Been around a really long time. A lot of these teams have really sewed in identities into who they are in the cities. A lot of changes this year, a lot of quarterback movement around and team rebuilding. So I think it's kind of like we've shaken the snow globe and we're starting over, but it's pretty exciting. I think it's going to be a good year. I know the guys that I've talked to, we have our show coming out this week and next week, kind of team previews. I think people are pretty excited for it.
So Stampeders plus 650, Rough Riders plus 1200, Alouettes plus 1200, Red Blacks plus 1500, and Elks plus 2000. Who is the best value north of 550 on that list?
Say that one more time.
So, like from Calgary being at plus 650, and then the Rough Riders and Alouettes at plus 1200, the Red Blacks at plus 15, and Edmonton at plus 2000.
Calgary 100%. Calgary 100%. They have the most stability year over year. They're the ones that lost their legacy quarterback in Bo Levi to the Ticats. You have Jake Mayer there. He's been on the show. This will be his third season there, first fully under his control here playing. I think Jake's really going to light it up. Alouettes have a whole restart from last year. They brought in, basically they switched a lot of their players with the Saskatchewan Roughriders. So you kind of have, the Montreal Roughriders now a little bit with Cody Fajardo there. And then Saskatchewan was a dumpster fire last year. Edmonton has not won a home game since 2019. That includes the year off in 2020. So, but it's been like 3,500 days or something since Edmonton's won a home game. Excuse me, that's incorrect. It's whatever it would be, 1,500.
A lot of days.
I would do Calgary with that. I think Calgary has a lot of. I would certainly put them above the Ticats. Like I said, we don't know how Bo Levi is going to look there, and I'm very scared. I'm a BC Lions fan. I called them America's CFL team. I don't know if Vernon Adams is the one that's going to lead us to the promised land. He's the one taking over for Nathan Rourke, who just got signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars to be presumably their quarterback 3 there.
Those Rourke's, man, and Rourke's younger brother at Ohio too is probably, obviously probably not an NFL guy, but that guy could end up in any number of leagues and probably make just as much waves as Nathan Rourke did.
Yeah, I'll be curious. I mean, Nathan was a really great story for the CFL. I think we would have been challenging for the Grey Cup if he wouldn't have gotten hurt. He came back for the playoffs. He just never really was quite where it was. I feel bad. I think the CFL really would have liked, obviously, him to stay up there and kind of the ratings and everything that he drew. He very much wants to go to the NFL. It's that question like we've talked about with the XFL, right? Would you rather be a star in the XFL, making this much money, a little bit, or I can be on the practice squad getting a lot more, but I'm probably not going to see the field a lot. I mean, Nathan could have been a star in the CFL for the next 10 years if he wanted to be.
And, that trickle-down effect. And so the National Arena League and fan-controlled football, they put their games live on YouTube. So the accessibility factor is fantastic for leagues like that if it's something you want to watch. And Arena is always easy watching. And guys like Rakeem Cato, CFL, at least for a little bit, I believe, was Rakeem Cato with Montreal?
I don't know. Sorry.
But currently the quarterback of the Fayetteville Mustangs, it's like, dude, we see like there is that much talent in professional football now to where these leagues can survive and can put out a good product, which ultimately is the bare minimum for what you're going to need for long-term survival.
Well, be careful. I mean, fan control football, they pushed back their season. They don't have any dates up right now. They were getting involved in basketball and they pushed the football back. At some point, there is a tipping point of we have enough physically fit, capable people to play. I know people talk all the time. There's all this talent. when you have the CFL, the XFL, the USFL, obviously the NFL, they're expanding to 3 quarterbacks. That's going to hurt these leagues. Then you have the IFL, NAL, whatever, and the arena leagues coming back next year. At some point, there's a tipping point. You got MLFB always sticking their nose in everything with their $50 in the bag of chips that they pay their players. So at some point, they will run out. But fan control football has been very quiet for a product that I thought was very good the last 2 years.
Well, they made their name with those controversial personalities. And, it's why some of these leagues need to stop looking towards cities like Orlando and, the bigger markets and try to serve a market that's less served, because there's plenty of arena leagues and arena teams that have found success by, catering to an area that otherwise doesn't have any professional sports to attend.
No, it's good. I mean, we'll see. And I mean, the expansion. I mean, I know we hit on it. Expansion's kind of always the big topic with all this, but I mean, we're year 1.5 for the USFL. We're year 1 for the XFL. Like, we're kind of getting through all this, but it is exciting. It's good for the players, more opportunities for the staff and the trainers and the coaches and the people that sell tickets to the arenas. I mean, it helps the economy of alternate football to have all these leagues.
And I'll tell you, man, I attended that USFL doubleheader in Canton, and I got this free USFL shirt. They gave us a free USFL free stuff. The budget for giving fans free stuff with your league name and logo on it, that can never be underrated. But Reid, I know you got a 9 p.m. 9 p.m. Eastern time appointment. They see that's how easy that mistake is to make. I know you got to make that, but thank you so much for being here today. I'm glad we finally got to do this. It's great interacting with guys like you on the internet about these leagues. It's what makes being a fan of these leagues so fun. And so if you have anything that you want to say, anybody or anything you want to shout out, the floor is yours.
No, I appreciate it. I mean, we cover all these leagues. Obviously, XFL, USFL, and CFL is the biggest. Like I said, CFL is starting. You can finish the USFL season. CFL will carry you through to November, get you through the NFL season. You can kind of double dip that way. It's really fun. The personalities are there. I think the CFL has a tremendous group of media covering them, and it's good. It's really good football. If you're okay with the XFL, USFL quality of game, you'll be very much okay watching the CFL. If you're kind of an NFL snob, right, then obviously you're not going to enjoy any of this stuff. But if you're listening to this, if you're a fan of that, we cover everything on the Markcast. We post every Friday. We've been doing XFL and USFL recap shows on Mondays following the weekend. And I think we're going to continue that with the CFL. The CFL podcast game in Canada is a little lacking. And so I think we can have I think we can continue to kind of have some things that we can add to that conversation. So the Markcast.com, you can go to the YouTube and all that other stuff.
Guys, he's so busy in this game. I don't know how he even squeezed coming on this podcast in tonight. You should see the activity level of this guy's Twitter feed. Folks, go check out the Markcast, and he is Reid Johnson, the host of said Markcast. If you want to follow me on Twitter, that's at RotoBrady. Check out my USFL gambling content and MMA DFS / sports betting gambling content on the Tap That podcast, RotoBo's official MMA podcast. Thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for Reid for being here. Peace and have a good weekend.